Hey everyone, deja vu. Last week I started our episode with a quick blurb from Meagan, just letting you know that we had some audio technical issues last week. Thankfully, this week was better. We still had a couple of instances where some of the audio seemed to overlap or there was a little bit of an echo. We're not really quite sure what's happening. Amanda and I don't have a sound engineer on staff or anything. It's just the two of us doing our best. We've been using the same software and the same process and the same equipment all season, so we're not quite sure why all of a sudden we're having some issues, but we thank you for your patience while we work on sorting it out. If you can believe it, next week is our final episode of season 1, and so we will continue to troubleshoot, and definitely by season 2 we should be back up and running. Hopefully next week it's not deja vu part 3 with me popping in to talk about sound issues, but we appreciate your patience, and there's some awesome content in here. We had a guest this week who's talking about resparking joy in learning, so we hope you'll stick with us as we work through it. Thank you. Welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
We are your messy, imperfect homeschool moms. We both love homeschooling, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. We love being with our kids. We're not those parents that can't wait to get rid of their kids. But we will never show up here like shiny influencers and tell you that our lives are perfect all the time. Homeschooling is awesome. We love homeschooling. But that doesn't mean that some days aren't hard AF. Okay? So here we go.
Yeah, right. And, it's important to take a minute to just say that we are recording this at the tail end of election week, election season 2024 here in the US. Now, more than ever, it is essential to find safe spaces for progressive, secular people, but homeschoolers especially. This is what we have worked, really so hard to build here, is just that safe, secular, progressive space for people. So if you believe that Black Lives Matter, if you believe love is love, no human is illegal, women should have freedom of choice, and all of those other virtues that celebrate differences rather than utilize them as a tool for alienation and, just all of that, welcome. We're your people. We know it's a hard week, a hard month, probably a hard few months to come, probably some hard years to come, but we're here. And yeah, we're glad you found us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, welcome. So we know that many members of our community are scared and heartbroken this week. We've talked to a number of you in our private Facebook group and things like that. It's a hard week to kind of resume any semblance of business as usual. Here we go. So we will do our best this week to respect the heaviness of the week while providing you with information on our topic of the week. So we will be discussing today a topic that I'm super excited to hear more about, and it is the idea of resparking a joy of learning or a love of learning in your kids. And this is a weak spot for both Amanda and myself. We've been homeschooling our kids since they were really pretty young. And even though my oldest had a really traumatic and crappy public school experience, he still loved learning. He absolutely loved learning, and he was sparked and interested. And so both of us have kind of been raising information sponges this whole time. And that's not always typical.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we get questions from parents who are maybe pulling their 6th grader or their 9th grader, and they're trying to reignite that fire, of course, we've got thoughts. We've always got thoughts. But we are far from experts, okay? And that's where our guest today comes in. So we'll welcome Danielle Calhoun here just momentarily. But for now, let's make sure that we kick off our customary weekly update. So how are things with you, Megan? How is Europe treating you?
Europe is good. If you're watching on video, I have nowhere to put my microphone this week because I have Airbnb furniture that I've kind of Legoed together into a desk. And so I'm just holding it for the entire episode today. Hopefully my sound will be okay. Europe is good. We have changed location from last week. We were in Gdansk and we are now in Warsaw. And we've been doing some walking tours and things like that. I think the biggest takeaway from this stop of our trip is the 156 stairs it takes to get from the curb to the door of our apartment. We arrived after dark, and we didn't travel super heavy. We have backpacks and hand luggage, but It was 75 steps to the apartment building and then another 84 to our front door. And we have my kiddo service dog with us. So like when we're done recording tonight, she's going to need to go to the bathroom, So, and we're staying in Old Town, which is, I mean, this stunning 18th century fortress, but there's not an ounce of grass in Old Town,
Oh,
but
no.
it's all cobbles and brick. So we have to actually leave that area. I know, right? It was not very well planned on my part, but I still wouldn't trade it. It's stunning. So yeah, it's been good. Tomorrow we're doing a walking tour of the Warsaw Ghetto. And so I'm really, I shouldn't say excited about that, but it's going to be a highlight for me for this trip because I'm a massive history nerd. So yeah, I mean, it's been a heavy week. It's been a real shit week and, but we're plugging along and we're doing what we do. So how about you, Amanda?
Yeah. I mean, that says it all, right? It's like it's kind of a shitty week. Like I have champagne chilling in the fridge and I'm wondering if I just drink it all one night because we're not going to get to use it the way I was hoping, the way that we got to use it last election cycle. I will say I'm going to put a preface out there. I'm going to do my best to stay focused and on track. We've talked a lot on this show about the fact that I am disabled. I have a lot of health things going on. This week, one of my specialists changed some of my medication. And I had to choose between, I knew that it would give me some focus problems and things like that. And I had to choose between taking it when I knew I needed to drive my kids somewhere. Tuesdays are our big driving day. So that wasn't an option. And then I decided like, okay, well, I'll just do it on Wednesday, which just so happened to also be the day we got the election results. And so it's been a whole combination of like not feeling good, generally speaking. And I really should be hydrating better. My head is like floating off of my body because of these new meds that they're not new, but I've increased this amount and whatever. So I'm not my best self, but I'm going to try really hard to stay focused. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully next week will be better for all of us, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think no worries. I think everybody's a little bit banged up for various reasons this week. So yours are different, but I think we're kind of, you're in good company. So
I know, right? I mean, it's that thing. I don't think there's any point in blaming anyone or pointing fingers, right? There's like a lot of things that went wrong and there are a lot of issues and we'll probably end up talking about those maybe in our book club podcast because for me, some of that dovetails and ties together. So listen in on Thursday. I will say that me personally, I'm like, did I write enough postcards? Did I write enough letters? I didn't phone bank this year and I did phone bank during the Biden election. And so I'm like, maybe I should have made sure I phone banked, even though I only talked to two people, hours on the phone and I only got two people to pick up. Like, what if everyone did that, and the reality is you put as much in as you can when you can. And, I used as many spoons as I had and I have to try to reassure myself, right, that I did. My husband and I, between us, we did send a lot of postcards and letters and we tried. We put in a good effort. I'm not the middle class, not white lady that everyone's mad at. I promise. All right. Yeah. So, all right. Let's get a little. We're going to shift. We're not going to make this a whole. What the hell is wrong with the United States? And we're sorry to everyone else. Let's do this, right? So Danielle, we would love it if you would introduce yourself to us and our podcast listeners, right? Tell us a little bit about how your homeschooling journey began, the process, and just kind of how you ended up here.
My name is Danielle, and I am a mother of two beautiful, teenage, neurodivergent, hippie things. And we're in Florida, always been based in Central Florida, originally in an urban area in the middle of Tampa. So it was wonderful and hard at the same time. And 2 years ago, we moved out of Tampa into kind of more of a rural space. And we have been homeschooling for about, I guess this will be our 5th or 6th year. And the shift in how we homeschooled when we were in city versus out here has been drastically different, as well as the crowd. And learning how to navigate those spaces has been interesting as well. So I have had to kind of, dare I say, deconstruct a lot of my mindsets on how I think homeschooling should go post public school chaos, and also transition to what is this going to look like for our family in this season as we kind of come closer to those last years together where, you're just trying to get your kids to be independent and feel good about where they're at and begin to consider, like, what are the things that I really want to pursue? And for us, that's been very non-conforming. So we kind of started our path one way. It's pivoted a trillion different times. And we're now interest-led based homeschoolers, or for the crowd that is more familiar, the ever so loved unschooling community. It's a very polarizing space, to use that label. I don't want to say anything wrong to make anybody mad.
Well, Meagan is a
I know.
hardcore unschooler, so you're safe in this space. I may balk a little
It's
and
fun. I
occasionally
can take
make
it.
fun, but I think one thing that you said really rings true for everyone who's homeschooling, right? And whether you're an unschooler or a hardcore academic aggressive unschooler or anywhere in between, that idea that to successfully homeschool, you have to be ready to shift as necessary.
Adaptable.
You have to be aware and yeah, exactly. Because if you're not going to have a good experience and you're not going to be getting the most out of the opportunity to homeschool, right? So I guess one of the first things that I kind of want to start with, we're building a foundation here. Many parents, I know Meagan and I included, have endured the dreaded IEP meeting, right? I hear that there are unicorns out there who have great meetings and great teams. I personally haven't. I don't think I've met any of them.
That's nice for them. I love that for them.
Right? Right. So what was your IEP process like, and how did it affect your kiddos' journey in school and just where did that?
So just for reference, my two kids are 15 and 13. So technically, if we're going off of grade levels, they're in 10th and 8th. And I had to look up at the sky because we don't really go by that at all. And they have to look at me half the time. And I'm like, oh, we're going to get there, kids. But when my kids were small, when my firstborn was small, I thought I was going to start off homeschooling and stick with it. And my vision of what homeschooling looked like was very school at home, very regimented, very bookworks and things like that. And immediately it fell apart. And I'm like, this is not the kid for this. And I'm not the mom for that, honestly, if I want to be like super real with myself. And I put him in preschool and he loved it. He was great. And then we pivoted from preschool to private school and everything was going fine there. I guess technically the way that private school was set up, they were kind of homeschoolers under like the private school system somehow. I don't know. But everything was kind of pushed along, sort of. No real interventions or anything like that. Like there were concerns about like learning challenges and stuff like that, but they just genuinely weren't equipped with the resources and the knowledge to know what to do with kids that didn't fit the mold. And that kind of ended when my youngest started there, and my youngest really didn't fit the mold. And so we moved to this really amazing public school in central Tampa that was devoted to nature. And they had a garden that the kids could do every week. They had a garden teacher, a dedicated garden day, dedicated nature teacher. So the kids were very hands-on, very kinetic, very dirty. Every day they came home filthy dirty and happy. And then when my oldest was entering about halfway through their third grade year, that's when testing starts in Florida. I don't know if that's nationwide or what, but there were some big challenges that were brought to the surface. And I had already voiced prior to the testing that I had concerns for where they were at academically and the challenges that they were having. But it wasn't until they did the testing that they could actually identify it. And he had an amazing teacher at the time. She's still a great friend to this day, and I love her with my whole heart. And she was like, I think that we need to put him on a 504. And then that led to, I think we need to do an IEP. And then there were all these interventions and all these things that were happening. And my kid was loved by his peers and by his teachers. But academically, like, he was being strung along, like, and he hated it. And his little spirit was just dying day by day. Every time he'd come home, he'd have like extra homework with the same stuff that never really fixed like his needs completely. So when COVID hit, we did online schooling through the school. And that's when I was like, oh, well, he does really good whenever I'm sitting with him. Like, if I could just be more hands-on, like if he had that dedicated time, then we could, pivot. He does really good whenever we have online things to read with pictures, like versus just a plain old book. Like, and we had gotten him tested and he was triple dyslexic. So I call it trifecta. So dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and dyslexia, reading, writing, and math. And he began a year prior to COVID doing music lessons on site at the school. And he was instantly connected to the guitar and just thrived in that space. So when we decided to move to homeschooling, I thought that we were going to do like maybe some level of eclectic online, like everything's going to be on a Trello board. You guys just check the boxes, do this stuff. Like, and it worked for a little bit, but he was lying and he was like, I don't want to do this, or, you know what I mean? Things like that. And it just kind of fell apart. But what stuck was music the whole time. And we were like, okay, well, let's just keep pivoting to what our kids are leaning closer and closer to. And really, the re-sparking learning has never been an issue for my youngest child. He's, like you were saying, like Liam, I think you mentioned, never had an issue with learning. My youngest has always been curious and inquisitive and like willing to explore new things. But my oldest, when he got out of public school, he just really was hard pressed to not do anything that was remotely learning. Like, so we did a lot of gaming, we did a lot of movies, we did a lot of audiobooks, and we did a lot of Legos and music. Music just kept coming back, kept coming back, kept coming back. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to hack this space and this season that we have together to best fit your needs. So sure, we aren't going to officially do ELA program or something like that, but I will get every version of graphic novel I can find for every required reading that a kid would have to read in high school or something like that. Or we would read the audiobooks, and then we were still doing interventions on the side as well. So it made it more attainable, approachable for him, and just gave him space to see that, like, we're not going to be worried about these things. You're not stupid. Your brain is a literal gift to the world. And we reframed a lot of those challenges that the school kind of stigmatized in a way that would better suit him. So like we looked up famous dyslexics and the statistics of famous dyslexics and how they're like the top, 50% of CEOs and things like that. Like, and just showing them that, like, both my kids have different neurodiversity challenges and they're both twice exceptional, but they just showing them that, like, these things that you are battling with are hard, and the better we learn to understand them and work with them instead of against them, the more we're going to enjoy this process. I think for them to learn to trust me as a leader, as a teacher, as a guide was really important, just as much as it was important for me to trust them. So, like, and to trust myself, because I think, as moms, like me personally, I really suck at trusting myself. Like I'm working on it, y'all. Like I'm working on it, work in progress. But just knowing that, like, learning is literally always happening. And I would take days, like I would be very intentional with my seasonal planning, even though it was unschooling, where I would sit down and I would write, like, okay, this is what they're really into right now. What are they learning from that? Before ChatGPT existed. Now you can just plug it into ChatGPT and it'll tell you. But before I would like think like, okay, if we're going to do this Minecraft mod, like what is the math that is happening? What is the reading that is happening? What is the, you know what I mean? And just kind of really remind myself more than anything else that my kid was healing, that they weren't just a zombie, and that we were going to get to a season where we could explore other things deeper. I just had to sit in this for a minute. Yeah. Give them space.
I have to say, okay, so as the super academic aggressive homeschooler, I think that a lot of parents who are coming at it and being more on my end of the spectrum struggle with this idea of deschooling, right? Because it feels like you're not doing anything. It feels like they're not learning anything because you don't have a worksheet to look at, or you're not doing any kind of testing or those kinds of things. But I think what you just said there at the end is a really great tool and resource that we sometimes forget about because we didn't grow up with it, right?
No.
Like we did not grow up with ChatGPT. But as a parent who is going through the deschooling process, which truly that just means that you are letting go of these ideas you grew up with of like, this is what education and learning has to look like. And as you're kind of deprogramming those ideas and getting back to this, like, learning can be fun. How are we going to make learning enjoyable for all of us? Put the things that you're doing into Chat GPT, like even the most basic, like whatever they did, or kind of, and ask it for what kind of educational things they're learning and let it spit out a whole list. And yes, you're going to read through the list and some of them you're going to be like, no, actually, that wasn't actually part of it. Like it has no idea what it's talking about. Like that's
keep
not
learning.
Right. Like, yeah, I mean, it's not yeah, but it's a great way, an easy way to really help reassure yourself that there's stuff happening and going on, even when it's not as obvious as a completed worksheet or an online module.
It's true. And it's a very good point. I think that it was easier for me to be open to this possibility because, well, for two reasons. So my partner was unschooled in like the worst case scenario situation, like out of kind of neglect, from like not neglect, just a lack of resources, lack of access, things like that. You know what I mean? And he is a commercial contractor, and he went to school for commercial contracting license. And even though you can't tell because we have post Hurricane Milton damage and our door frame is knocked out, but what is it? The cobbler's kids don't get any shoes. What's that phrase? Like, we'll get to it. But like he went to this like commercial contracting school and he got all the books and he literally had like a middle school education technically by public school standards, and he had the intention and he had the focus and he had the desire to get it, and homeboy, he went through it and he got it on the first try. And a lot of his peers have called him and they have high school diplomas and they've done things and they're like, how did you do it? This is my third time trying to take this test and I can't get through it. And my husband's just like, I don't know. Like, I just really, really went after it. I really desired to do it. And I think for me, like having his story and his experience in my heart, and also having my own experience with public school and struggling and being undiagnosed dyslexic my whole entire education and not enjoying learning until I was in college, like I had this kind of flexibility because I knew that like there wasn't this fixed mindset about what school needed to be like because I didn't have those parents and I didn't have that experience. Like it sucked. So like whatever way I can make this fresh for my kids, like, and kind of heal that part was really important. In that deschooling process, I just devoured every freaking book and podcast I could get my hands on, even though they say not to do that during deschooling. I was just like really about just absorbing as much as I could to make sure that I was making a good pivot in the right direction, and know, again, to hold it loosely. That's what I always say. It's just hold things loosely. Like, who knows what tomorrow will be like.
I think
one of the trends that I see so often is that when people who are in your position, Danielle, or what I understand to be your position from the very brief insight that I have into your life, I should say, when they pull their kids from school, they're looking at it and saying, my child is behind. And now you're telling me to take more time off, right? I have time to make up. I can't sit around and bake cookies and plant a garden with this kid who is 3 grade levels behind or 2 grade levels behind, right? And we talk a lot in the homeschool groups, and, it's really hard, right? Because then all these people swoop in with comments and like, there's no such thing as behind, right? And I understand the concept, right? And it's like, well, I mean, there technically is such a thing as behind. Like to your point with your husband's experience, right? Like, that might be an experience where you say like, okay, this person should have more access to things or would benefit from something different. But generally speaking, the concept is that kids will pick up things when they're ready or when it's being taught properly or when the environment is right. And so that's kind of why people say there's no such thing as behind, right? Like give them time, they'll learn it. But yeah, in that deschooling period, and I literally just was talking to somebody yesterday and I said they were looking for an online platform. They were going to pull their kid from school. They talked about in their question, they talked about the fact that their kid was having a really traumatic school experience. They were going to pull their kid from school. They were going to put them online. And I was like, okay, so Amanda and I had done a while ago this really intensive review of secular online platforms. And so I said, okay, fine, here's 2 that we liked. I will answer your question. But I cannot beg you enough, please, to not pull this kid on Friday and put them online on Monday, right? Especially if they're having a traumatic school experience, because then 4 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, those parents are the ones that end up in the groups going, I don't think homeschooling is for us. It's like pulling teeth. It's not working, right? And it's like, but we told you, right? It's kind of like telling the brand new homeschooler not to spend $1,000 on curriculum. And it's like, and then 4 months later, it's the same thing. And it's like, just listen to the veterans. We promise you, even if you perceive your child to be drastically behind, take your time off. You even if nothing else, even if you're not, like Amanda said, you're deprogramming your thoughts on school and what school quote unquote should be and all of that. If your kid has had a traumatic experience, you're on that roller coaster too, right? The 2 of you need time to freaking decompress and regroup and to, you use the word heal before, Amanda. Yes, my child needed extensive healing after his public school experience, and he was only 8. The longer kids are in, the longer that's going to take. So I love that you're just like, we're going to let this happen. So can I ask you, Danielle, okay, so a lot of times people are like, well, how long is the deschooling? And then when do I transit? Right. For us, I never felt like we transitioned from deschooling to like, there wasn't like a date on the calendar circled in red, right? Where it was like deschooling ends. It was kind of like they bled together, right? Where we started introducing some things and stuff like that. So having that in mind, what did your deschooling period look like as far as length of time before you started to kind of see that spark come back with your kiddo after that period?
She's like, not yet.
I'm still waiting. Any day now.
I read somewhere that it said like deschooling isn't officially over until you stop thinking about deschooling. Like, and that's when you know you're kind of like in the thick of it. You can't turn back. Just kidding. You're officially too far behind. No. Just kidding. Just kidding. For us, I think it was easily 1.5 years. Like, and there are still times. I also read that like if you ever push your kid or try and like, maybe you're not doing it consciously, but maybe you're like subconsciously trying to like coerce them into doing something learning based, and they have like educational trauma that like triggers the process all over again. You have to start all over with deschooling. I think I've probably unintentionally done that about 1 billion times. Like with my oldest, my youngest is puppy dogs and rainbows all day long with learning, but my oldest particularly is just I love that child. He's just very resistant to anything that isn't completely his idea, and that's what makes him amazing. Like, and reminding myself that like, hey, chill out. Like, he's got this. So for us, I'd say probably 1.5 years. Yeah.
Mhm. And then I also just wanted to kind of tag on to what you said about reading and listening to everything you could get your hands on during your deschooling phase, which is ill-advised, quote
Who's
unquote,
they?
according to them, whoever
Yeah.
they are, right? For me personally, if there is unknown, which is like, well, what comes after this, right? Like, okay, fine, I'm deschooling, but what comes after this? If I don't know what comes after it, I will stress about it the entire time, which kind of negates the purpose of this brilliant blossoming of deschooling, right? And so, yeah, I think if that's your personality style, it could be helpful to do that. So for me, I need my questions answered. Otherwise, they just cycle in my head and I stress over them. And we say Amanda is silver lining Amanda, and I'm like red terror alert level person. So like I will hit the red terror level thinking like of all these things. So if you give me information, I can deschool
Yeah.
more calmly, as calm as I get.
Yeah, I'm flexible. I'll hold things loosely, but at the same time, you bet your ass I'm going to be somewhat OCD, because I do have OCD, like about covering my butt because I'm in state of Florida and who knows what could happen, even though they're pretty lenient on homeschooling, but also on reassuring myself that we're doing all right. So a lot of my homeschooling friends that aren't unschoolers say that I record more than they ever have. And they go through the check boxes and everything. But I keep track of everything that we do in my notes on my phone so that at the end of the year for my evaluations, I should have no questions. If an inspector came to my door today, they'd go home with a box full of books and they'd be educated on something by my 13-year-old. Like, and for me with the deschooling process, like the next part, like I've read a lot of, I don't know if you've ever done a podcast or explored Blake Bowles. Yeah, did you say your son? Yes.
Yes.
We're actually doing his book right
Oh,
now.
so
That's what we're
good.
doing.
Yes, so
That's
perfect. So perfect. So I read High School Without College, and I was like, this makes sense. Like, I have this kid that doesn't want to do anything educational or formally educational in normal terms, but he is learning so much about the music industry. He plays 4 instruments. He's songwriting every day. He's playing shows on the weekends. He's learning the ins and outs of sound engineering, and just building up this educational portfolio that if he chooses to go to college, awesome. Like, we have everything that we need. And if he doesn't, he's going to be hireable because we built that foundation based off of what was going to last him throughout life. And that is most definitely, in his case, music as the core pillar.
All right. So if there's a wonky edit here, friends, it's my fault, right? I'm in Warsaw and apparently my internet was just like, I'm going to have a moment. So there might be a weird edit, just saying. But back to the convo, right? Okay, so we unschool as well, but I don't know that any two families unschool the same. So what does a typical day,
Right.
week, month, etc. look like in your house, Danielle, with your kids?
Sure. So I wanted to caveat on the 8 types of learning. So like when we first started, we wanted to really like explore like where were my kids like really, and we learned about the 8 types of learning, or the 8 types of intelligences, which means each person is more inclined to a different kind of higher thinking in a different topic field. So my oldest is definitely more musical intelligence wise, whereas my youngest is meant for the trees. They are nature hiking to the max. And when we made this pivot to unschooling, it was something that we learned slowly. For one, how to navigate hacking my oldest learning challenges with an IEP minded kind of accommodations way, but also learning how to navigate my youngest more social emotional challenges, being neurodiverse, and some things that keep peopling hard for them. Humaning, anything to do with humans, they just don't want anything to do with it because they're literally meant for the trees. Like, so for us, like, finding that balance has been really fascinating because they are on two totally opposite ends of the spectrum with regard to their needs and their interests, and just kind of building the bridge and the compromises and navigating those things. So for us, every year, I try to start something in the fall, but I feel like periodically we kind of circle back to like goal setting. I know you guys just did your podcast episode on
Amanda
that,
loved it.
where we,
It was right up her alley.
yeah, awesome. And it doesn't have to be like super strenuous goal setting. It's just something where we're like, what do we enjoy doing more of? What do we want to explore? What are we curious about that maybe we want to see, like, hey, is this working? Is it not working? What do we want to stick deeper into? And just like keeping those heart check-ins kind of a thing. Like, are we going in the right direction together? How can I support you better? And I think a lot of times unschoolers get a bad rap that they just are like hands off, but really these kids, man, these unschooling kids, they require a certain level of hands-onness that is extra to the max compared to their peers from what I've observed. I can't speak for all of them, but, and so I just really have dedicated this last 5 years to being like, what's working? What can we do more of that makes you happy, that makes you ignited, that keeps you alive and curious, and asking a lot of questions and just being engaging. So that's quarterly, I'd say, roughly. If we kind of skip more to like a weekly level, it's a lot of hardcore electric guitar and loud amps, which my child with sensory processing disorder does not like. So there's a lot of loud music in our house a large majority of the time. And we've just like learned to live with it. So if my oldest is practicing for a gig or whatever, then my youngest is outside 30 feet up in a tree, like sitting with the ants. Literally came in today and said, I followed the path to the ant trail all the way over to Mike, our neighbor, all the way over to Mike's shed. And it looks like they went from our house to the neighbor's house following an ant trail. And I'm just like, this is awesome. Like, this is great. I'm glad that you did that. A lot of carpooling my oldest to practice and multitasking that time with my youngest in parks and hiking and biking. A lot of audiobooks in the car. Together, we listen to a different audiobook pretty fluidly. It's been our thing since we started, and it's wonderful. Like, I never would have been an audiobook person prior to homeschooling, I don't think. But it's the one thing that we really connect with together, the three of us. My husband's working, so he doesn't really get that. But it's fun to have these inside jokes with my kids that he's like, what are you guys talking about? I was like, oh, it's a book. You know? A lot of graphic novels, a lot of friend hangs, Google hangs, a lot of gaming. My oldest does a lot of songwriting and online recording of new songs that he's picked up, figured out, whatever, for his bandmates, figuring out lyrics, things like that. Whereas my youngest is more introverted and is wanting to do like high school biology and zoology advanced and a lot of bike riding, a lot of hikes, a lot of vivacious reader, just going through every book they can get their hands on. Like the last few years, I think that they've averaged 70 books read a year, like, and they're not audiobooks, they're big, huge honkin' chapter books, and they're about like, I don't know if you've seen the book, like How the Snail Eats the Leaves or something like that. It's a whole book devoted to snails eating leaves. They just told me from another room. And they listen to a lot of podcasts that are about nature and science and things like that, Legos and gaming in their end and baking. So less peopling, but a lot of outside time. And these two kids, I'm grateful for them. I feel our closest homeschooling friends are very much aligned with us ideologically. So whenever I say this next part, it's going to sound hard to believe that they're aligned, but they're a family of 10. a family of 10. And this beautiful mother, I don't know how she has time for each of her child's needs, because I'm just over here with these two kids trying to make these two kids' lives perfect and aligned with their needs. But she's got like eight children. They come from different backgrounds and things like that, and she's just like honoring each kid as best as she can. And she's not an unschooler, but they kind of are. So in the event that you hear loud noise in the future, it's because half of those kids are going to be back at my house any minute. But that's just the nature of, being a mom, just trying to figure it out, trying to honor your kids and make sure that you're doing right by them.
I think it's interesting you said like that you figured out kind of what makes your kids tick, right? And you have your nature loving kiddo. Amanda and I have talked about before how the default these days seems to be like the kid comes home, the kid goes online, right? It's like, I need an online program for this. And listen, if you are a single working parent or a disabled parent, whatever, and the spoons you have are online
Yes.
go, right? We do not judge. But I think sometimes that's the default because people don't realize other pathways, right? And so sometimes that's the case as well. And I'm thinking, like, could you imagine having brought them down in front of like Time for Learning or something, right? Like what a mismatch that would be to what you've just described as their personality. So taking that time to really, because we think we know them, but the reality is when they're in school, they're gone more of their waking hours than they're home. So it's tough.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing their authentic selves because they're not in an environment where their authentic selves are embraced or welcomed or brought out either. So when that's part of that deschooling process, right? Seeing who they truly are.
They don't have the space to be able to even figure that out, to even think about it. Or at least that was our situation in public school. Like they didn't have the capacity to even explore what they were about. So it's been an interesting go. I will say that both of them, as I'm sure you guys can relate with your children, like they pull you out of your comfort zones in different ways. So my oldest, like I'm at dive bars on the weekend and like have sticky shoes when I get home. And I'm like, oh, I smell like urine and old beer. Like it's fine if that's your jam. Like, but it's not really where I expect it to be with my 15-year-olds. Like, and it's so loud and I'm just like, oh my gosh, but I'm also so proud and I'm like here for all of it. And then like my youngest, like wants to go on every nature trail that I'm like, can we just stay on the pavement? Like, let's just stay on the pavement. And I can hear them huffing from around the corner because they're listening to me because they know that it's true. Like, I'm like, that's when your dad's with you, do that. Like, but today we're just sampling this park. We're not having a full meal.
Especially like my kids were all born in South Florida. You can end up a full meal, especially during gator mating season. So like, those gators get pretty ballsy during mating season. Like stay on the trail during mating season, right?
The literal amount of times I'm like, please stay away from the water. Please stay away from the water because we're in the middle of Florida and the gators are alive and well.
I know nothing about it, but I love those social media videos where like the person is like, so does this water have gators in it? Let's see. It's wet.
Exactly.
Or sharks. Yeah. That's my existence.
They are in there.
I say Florida is like the Australia of the United States, like everything can kill you.
We lived 2 miles from the Everglades when we were there, and we had a huge Burmese python problem because people started releasing them and they were an invasive species, so they had the gators and the Burmese python were kind of fighting for like top of the food chain. And I mean, there are, if your kiddo is interested, go online, not yours specifically, but just anybody who's listening. There are horrific videos online of them fighting.
Yes.
And you'll see like a Burmese python that is the shape of an alligator because there's an alligator inside it, and then
or they get busted.
Like it's just it's bananas. Yeah, I mean, the Florida wildlife is like no joke. We lived down there for a really long time. I'm like, no, don't go near the water.
My child literally just said the other day, they're like, for my birthday in January, can we go to the Everglades? And I'm like,
it's so fun though. Okay. You can go to Everglades National Park. It's right there. Okay. Not National Park, sorry.
That's what they want to do.
But you can go to, what's the one I'm thinking of? Holiday Park, and you could do the fan boats and like the whole
Yeah.
thing.
I have a question, and I'm sure that it will vary in every homeschool, right? But I'm curious, in your specific homeschool, how has your homeschooling changed and morphed from when you first started, that kind of day one, up to now? Like, what would you say are the biggest changes between what you were doing and
I
what you
think
are doing now?
the biggest thing has just been listening and coming alongside my kids as a collaborator and a supporter and a guide instead of a compliance person per se. And just like, and that's fine if that works for other people because that is people's jam and I get that. But for us, like, I really I started off with, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go down this checklist. We're going to do this system. We're going to do the XYZ. And there are still some things that I incorporate that aren't necessarily their choice. So for me, literature has been really important because I want to make sure that they have the basic stories that most every other American child has read in their wheelhouse in the back of their heads, just for the sake of context culturally. And it just makes them better humans, I think, to have those stories in their hearts. Like, so maybe my kid wouldn't have chose to read, what was something we read, Fahrenheit 451. But I was like, we're going to read this and I'm going to get you this book in graphic novels so it's easy to attain so you have the context. And we read The Jungle and we read, all these different things. Right now we're reading the super OG forever long version of Wicked. I don't know if you guys have read Wicked, but holy cow, that's a book. How that movie is going to be PG, I have no idea because they have censored the crap out of it because that book is not PG. So for me, just trusting the process more, letting them lead, but also checking in a lot and saying, hey, we're also going to do these other bits. And as long as we have friends along for the ride, thankfully we don't have a big group of friends, but we have this one family that's a huge group of people that is right down the road from us. And I can always say like, hey, we just last year we did a World War II history study, and it was through graphic novels of different perspectives. So I did a graphic novel from a Russian perspective, a Japanese perspective, a German perspective, like, and just a little bit of a variety. And after each story, we would do food from that culture. So if I can make it about food or music or nature, then I got an in. Or friends, then I have their commitment. So yeah, just getting creative and not stressing.
Easier said than done, right? Yeah, especially if you're new.
Yeah.
Or if you're me. Yeah.
Yeah, also very true. Yeah. I have to say though, I think that the very first point you made is probably true for 90 to 95% of homeschooling parents, that the biggest difference between where we started and where we're at now, if we consider ourselves successful homeschoolers, is the amount of listening that we're doing. Right? I think we all, like when you first start out, no matter what, you're just not being as good of a listener as you really should be, and learning to let go of that and making it more of a collaborative process, even if you start out trying to make it a collaborative process. And part of that too is your kids growing up, right, getting older and being able to better vocalize what they want. And you can listen a lot more than having to
and the more they know you're
investigate
listening, the more they're willing to share. And that was hard for my oldest to learn, that I was going to support them. Like, they asked for an online $300 screaming class, like how to properly scream for a band. And they had gotten the recommendation from another local punk rock band, people that had taken this class online. And I'm like, okay, like, and they did it. Like, it's the first online class that they've done in 5 years. Like, I'm like, okay, well, just having them know that maybe I'm not going to say yes to everything, but like, if you really show me that you want this and that it's going to be beneficial for you, then I'm going to hear that. And you trust me, I trust you.
I love
Yeah.
that. Okay, so sometimes we hear from parents who they pull their kids. You go, okay, I see the merits of interest-led learning or incorporating some aspects of interest-led learning, wherever they're going to land on that spectrum, right? My kids have no interest. All they want to do is play video games, or all they want to do is Snapchat or something. I don't know. I have kids with too many interests, so I'm struggling to come up with just one thing that would not qualify, right? But, what do you suggest, right? Like, how do they begin to uncover interests? How do they provide a space where those things can surface when you have a kid who has school trauma, who's zombieified, who's perhaps, we've talked about the fact like gaming can be an amazing thing in an education, and there's also a very real thing of gaming addiction, right? Like, so if you do have a kid who's gaming addicted, how do you begin to kind of tease those things out and bring them to life? What would you suggest?
I think the biggest thing is to just continuously have open conversations and dialogue with them about the things that they are interested about in that moment. So, like, showing them that that's like a stepping stone of something more expansive. A good example of that is, like, I don't know if you guys have touched on the story of the kid that went to Rome on a school trip, or Greece. I'm not sure. It's one of the two. There's a game for both of them, but they got lost in their group. They were lost in the middle of this ancient city. And this kid looked around and they said, I know how to get back. And this kid led them through this city that he had never been in his whole life, and found his teacher. And his teacher was like, how in the world did you find me? How did you know how to get to me? And he said, Assassin's Creed. Like, and when my kids were in that like very vegetative, like deschooling state, like what I did was, instead of just saying like, hey, we're going to watch all these movies, like we would dissect them and be like, what's the world building elements of this? Like, how do you think that they learned to do that? Like, at the time, I think like Eternals or something had just come out, and there was like all this behind the scenes of how they built like the spaceship and how they came up with the language and all the historical components of how they made that movie happen. And just saying like, there's more to the story than just this thing that you're pressing these buttons, or this movie that you're watching with. Like, it's so deeper. It's much deeper than just showing them the depth to the things so that they can get out of it. And I know everyone's like weird and different about like technology restrictions, and we have our own boundaries in our house with that stuff too. But what I found with gaming, what we did, just to talk to that really quickly, when our kids were small, like, and they were in school, like they could only game on the weekends. And every time that they would get on the game and we had to go eat or something like that, it would result in the biggest meltdowns of my entire life. And it was just such a battle. And when we shifted, the biggest rule was that they needed to eat and that they needed to go to bed whenever I said to go to bed. And I know some unschoolers are like more autonomous with letting their kids go to bed when they want. And my kids, they don't have to be asleep. They just need to be in their rooms, and they can't have technology. So what happened from that was they learned to listen to their bodies, which I know that that's different for somebody with game addiction, stuff like that. But my kids, like, I'd be like, man, you have some gamer eye, kid. Like, how you feeling? You got a headache? Like, just making them aware that, oh, my body is not necessarily feeling the best because of this. And now they like are able to find that give. I hope that helps. I don't know if I went off topic.
No, you're good.
I'm
I think
sorry.
that actually is super helpful, because some people say, and
Yeah.
we've only had, because my oldest is almost 17, and we've only had a gaming system for like 2 years. We were like very late to gaming, and they only have like 3 or 4 games. But I hear sometimes too where people say like they would just game 24/7 if I let them. And so I like your kind of methodology of still being child-led in a lot of ways, but then also helping them find those executive function skills and those life balance skills and bringing those together, which is pretty cool.
That's definitely been a huge part of our life. Like, and my youngest too, like I said, is very heavy into nature, but will have seasons and moments where they're very into Stardew Valley, or they want to relaunch their Animal Crossing or something like that. And they might be in their room for a couple days, like, or something like that. And that's all they're doing. And my husband is probably my biggest challenger in these ways, ironically, because he'll be like, what are our kids doing? And I'll be like, give them a chance, let it cook, like, because they're going to come back, like, and they always do. Like, they go through their season, they go through their couple days, and then they're back up in the trees or whatever the case
I
is.
love
So,
that.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing that, because we do get asked that question, and it's a foreign concept to us in a lot of ways. And so it's helpful to know that if you have pulled a kid a little bit later, or you're really struggling to re-spark a kid who's had a really traumatic situation, there's hope, right? That was some really solid advice. So I loved all of it. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me. I like to share a story.
Yeah. And yeah, again, yeah, also thank you for coming on. For anyone who's listening, don't go anywhere. I know it sounds like we're wrapping up, but we actually have a student spotlight this week that we're going to get to here in just a minute. So, stick around and listen. Yeah. And again, thank you, Danielle, for joining us. I know you present around different places and you have a presentation and things like that. So if anyone wants more information, definitely check her out. You can find her on social media and all that.
Thanks, Jen.
We always enjoy getting to share the success of a fellow homeschooler. Not to outnumber Amanda this week, but there also happen to be an unschooling family. So she's
you're surrounded.
She's an awesome sport. So
that's it. That and the book club. I'm like, oh gosh.
Oh, sorry.
You're doing awesome.
I'm hanging in there.
Okay, so perhaps potentially less unschooling-ish. Before we hop into our student spotlight, we just want to remind you that we release a unit study every month, which is also not terribly up Amanda's alley, but it's slightly more academic. So we're leading in the right direction, right? So November's unit study, it's a theme every month, right? And I love the unit study because I get to just completely nerd out and come up with resources and activities and all kinds of stuff. So did you know that November is Aviation History Month? So that is our most recent unit study. And there's so much good stuff in there. There's content related to Tuskegee Airmen, Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh. Did you know that Charles Lindbergh was like a complete piece of crap and a total Nazi? Because it's in there. There was a group that will kind of remind you of a 4-letter abbreviation that exists now in America. And they literally held like Nazi rallies at Madison Square Garden in New York City and stuff. He was all in on that whole situation. So Charles Lindbergh has a pretty interesting past, right? So that's in there. The Night Witches, which were these Russian badass women, World War II wasps, more badass women. So there's so much stuff in there, right? So it's on our Patreon. Every member has access to the monthly unit study. There's a couple of them on there from beforehand too. You can historically go in and grab those ones as well. And everyone has access for as little as $7 a month.
Absolutely. So here's the thing, right? We vet all of the resources, books, articles, videos, like all of it. If it's in there, we already went through and vetted all of the resources that we use to build the unit studies. You don't have to spend your time doing it, and you can rest assured that it is inclusive and accurate. And we do our best to make sure that we're including own voices and that kind of stuff as well, right? Like we really do spend a lot of time to try to make sure that these are really quality resources. Every Patreon member has access to the unit study, again, like Meagan said, for $7 a month. And then we also have the VIP level, which gives you the unit study, but it also, for only $12 a month, gives you 2 live meetings every month with us. So you've got like one that's more of a homeschooling Q&A. It's great when you're just trying to figure out what you want to do, or you want to bat some ideas around about, we want to do more interest-led learning, but we're kind of stuck, or we really need some curriculum refresh stuff, but I'm just not really sure. Have you heard of anything? Like, what are your favorite gifted programs? What are your favorite programs for kids who are struggling with reading? Whatever it is, that's a great place to come and have those conversations with us. We're both always there and happy to have conversations. And then we also do one that's much more fun and just connecting and community, right? That's kind of like a happy hour, mom's night out type thing. So seriously, come and join us.
Student Spotlight. We don't judge bragging here.
So
We
thank you
celebrate
so much
with
to
you.
Mary, for submitting a student spotlight this week. We love it when we get a student spotlight. It really makes our day. I sent it to Amanda right away. I'm like, we have a student spotlight. So, okay. And I mentioned Mary's family are an unschooling family. So Mary submits, one thing I've always tried to do is let the kids build and create things. They wanted to build an ice rink and I laughed. I won't lie. I thought the idea was crazy and we were too far south. I told them it didn't get cold enough here. They turned one planter into a mini ice rink last Christmas. Then they dismantled all the planters and made a 10 by 15. Spring arrived and it melted. The research began. I cannot tell you how many hours they have researched, but it's a ton. They came up with several options for boards and liners. They had a few mechanical failures last year. The first plastic was too thin. Water expands outward when it freezes, so there were a few joint failures. Yesterday, they bought a box of reinforced plastic liner. Who knew that was a thing? Mary didn't. That's what following your kids' adventures will teach you, right? They got it for $80. It retails for $150, but they negotiated with the person and got it down to $70. They didn't. I love it, right? They didn't have change, and neither did the seller. Oops, life lesson learned. Love it. We went to Home Depot today for the wood, screws, and brackets. The first option didn't seem sturdy enough for the joints, so they went back to Home Depot for plan 2. I had to run up to Denver, and when I came back to a completed ice rink, the water had filled up in it, and it is now a rink. They're expecting several days for a complete freeze, but with cold temps this week, it may freeze just a little bit faster. So far, there have been no mechanical failures. They have a 16-foot by 32-foot ice rink in their backyard now, which is an awesome example of child-led learning or unschooling or whatever you want to call it. There was no textbook that could have taught them all of that stuff. They just kind of worked together. And she has, I forget how many kids Mary has. I want to say like 5, right? So there's cooperative teamwork in there and all kinds of stuff too. So I was like, I love that. So thank you so much, Mary, for submitting. That's so awesome. We love it.
That's impressive. I have a friend who lives in New Hampshire and they always make their own in their backyard. When I was a kid, we had one year we lived in Minnesota and we made one in the backyard as well. And it's not easy to get a good one. So I'm really curious exactly, like with all of these trials that they had, like how good the final
not because we don't trust it. We just want to,
we're going to need to see photos,
now
Mary.
we're invested, right?
No. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yep. We're invested. All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up the episode today. So our mantra for this week is, remember, igniting a love of learning takes time and patience, but you've already given your kids the gift of curiosity just by showing up. Trust the journey, embrace the messy days, and know that little sparks can lead to big fires.
So awesome.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Danielle. Thanks everyone who's tuning in and listening. We really appreciate you being here this week.
Have an awesome day.